We're going to give everyone a few minutes to join. My name is Allison, and I'm so happy to see everyone here today. Please let us know where you're coming from in the chat. We love to know where everyone's watching from. I'm at the Tri-School office in New York. It's good to see so many of you. Thank you for joining. I'm going to say a few words about the event, and then we'll get started. So welcome to Tricycle's 4th Annual Buddhism and Ecology Summit. My name is Allison Spiegel. I'm Tricycle's Senior Editor of Audience Engagement, and I'm so happy to be with you here today for our 7th event of the series, How Interdependence Buoys the Spirit and Inspires Action, with Susan Bauer-Wu and Sharon Salzberg. This event, as many of you who have joined us know, is a 3-day series of conversations with Buddhist teachers, writers, and environmental activists, exploring the interconnectedness of the natural world. We're also offering a film screening of the movie Interdependence, which is an anthology of 11 short films exploring the diverse impacts of climate change across the globe. And you can watch that for a few more hours, so please do. And we're so grateful to our event sponsor, the Best Family Foundation, whose mission is to foster kindness and caring for all beings through mindfulness and meditation practices. You can learn more about their work at bestfoundation.org. So before we begin, I just wanted to let you know that we're going to leave some time for questions at the end of the session. You can put your questions in the chat at any point, and we will read them and pose them later. Or at the end, when we're at that point, you could also raise your Zoom hand if you'd like to ask your question live. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce our guest for today. Susan Bauer-Wu is the former president of the Mind and Life Institute, a globally impactful nonprofit co-founded by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. With a clinical foundation in nursing, Susan completed a PhD in psychoneuroimmunology and postdoctoral training in behavioral medicine and psycho-oncology. She is the author of Leaves Falling Gently, which will be re-released this May, and also the author of A Future We Can Love, described as medicine for despair and anxiety about climate change. Through her work, which you can find on comingtolife.com, we'll put that in the chat so you can see how that's spelled. Susan guides and counsels individuals and groups in purposeful living and dying. Sharon Salzberg is a founding teacher of the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts. Her latest book is Real Life, The Journey from Isolation to Openness and Freedom. She teaches the Tricycle online course, The Whole Path, also Real Love and The Boundless Heart, and co-hosts the Tricycle podcast, Life as It Is. Her popular podcast, The Meta Hour, has amassed 7 million downloads and features interviews with thought leaders from the mindfulness movement and beyond. So thank you so much for joining us, Susan and Sharon. Sharon, I will hand it over to you now.
Thank you so much. And hello, Susan. It's so nice to be here with you. I'm looking
Hi,
forward.
Sharon.
Yeah. I was just remembering, I think the last time we did a panel together was in Virginia, or is that right? Yeah. And you had just flown in from somewhere. You were very jet lagged, as I recall, and I was hoping you would sustain throughout the entire conversation.
I think I did.
You did. You were fantastic. And I know it's not easy. It's really wonderful to be here with you talking about this topic. I'm really personally so fascinated by hearing your insights into the power of compassion and community as essential elements and how we're meeting this really difficult and complex moment in our planet's history. So thank you so much for joining me. And yeah, I know you've spoken about very poignantly about how grieving for our planet is a natural response to our times. And I wonder what you would say about how grief and love fit in with climate activism and how they might serve us to move into action.
Yeah. Thanks, Sharon. It's great to be here with you again. Grieving is a natural response, and I generally feel more alarm when people aren't grieving, because grieving is an acknowledgement that there actually is a climate crisis rather than repressing or denying it. So, like, if we can begin at that place, we grieve because we love, right? And when we love this precious planet, the natural world, the fresh air, clean water, soil, the insects, the trees, fish, our four-legged friends, and one another, we grieve when we see them suffering, and we grieve when they're gone. And we grieve what the future will be for our children and our grandchildren and future generations. So our grief can be a wellspring to act, because it reminds us what we love, what we have already lost, but what we haven't yet lost, and what we want to protect. And so then we take care of what we love and what we care about. So love and grief are the sparks that actually activate us. They move us into action. And I see them as really being foundational to climate activism.
That's great. In your book, you also write about how we kind of came to see ourselves as separate from the earth and from each other. And in Buddhist teaching, we understand that ignorance of the truth of interdependence inevitably leads to suffering. And can you speak to how we suffer by seeing ourselves as separate from the earth and from one another?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely foundational when we begin to, when we notice that we fail to see it. And, I see that interdependence, and I know this summit is all about Buddhism and Eco-Dharma and about interdependence. And I see interdependence as being both the problem and the solution. And so why is it the problem? And well, it's because how we live, the choices we make, the energy we consume on a daily basis in our homes, our places of work, what we eat, what we buy, how we travel, how we care for the land, it all has consequences. And in developed countries like the United States, where people overconsume on a daily basis, including me, a privileged person, I recognize it, I'm aware of it, particularly when I go to other parts of the world that aren't as developed, or in all parts of the world where there's clear cutting of forests. The greenhouse gas emissions are huge. And as a result, there are atmospheric changes that happen on completely other parts of the world. And so that's, how interdependence, in a very simple way, is part of the problem. And it's also part of the solution, because how we live and the choices we make matter. And if we are consuming less and making wiser choices, we support policies that minimize greenhouse gas emissions and protect the land, water, and air, and keep corporations accountable and look at how we're investing money, then ultimately our independence can become part of the solution and contribute to atmospheric cooling. And it's both the problem and the solution. That's the good news and the bad news together. And I'd like to actually ask you, Sharon, from a Buddhist perspective, the truth of interdependence and how we see ourselves as separate and how that creates more suffering, both for one another and ourselves, as well as for the planet. So what do you think, being a Buddhist teacher?
Well, I love that formulation you just posed of it, interdependence being both the problem and the solution, because we don't, I think, often recognize it as the problem, that what happens over there doesn't nicely stay over there. It filters down to over here. And also the other part of that is that what we do, what we care about, where we put our energy, it matters because it too will ripple out. And I remember when years ago when the movie Contagion came out, and basically, the thesis of the movie is that someone has a bad day in Hong Kong one morning, and by the end of the week, half the planet is wiped out. Because that's how epidemiology would work, right? Is pointing out that we feel maybe so isolated or disconnected, but in truth, what happens over there will affect us over here and so on. So that's just an interesting facet of it. I think from the Buddhist point of view, interdependence is very much the solution, because it's not recognizing that has us behave so recklessly. It's really profound ignorance that we can just do anything we want, or, that we are separate, and there won't be ramifications, there won't be consequences to our actions or the actions of others. And so it's almost a kind of healing from disconnection that we need to understand the nature of how connected we truly are. And it's powerful. It's not like a superimposition of some nice view or something. It's powerful because it's the truth of things. It's inevitable. It's inescapable that our lives have something to do with one another. And that in this context would include the earth. It's our home. And how do we treat a home? How do we recognize that we're not just sort of dancing on the surface of things, immune from the consequences of actions, that it's a part of understanding life more realistically, more truthfully. And I would also quoting David Loy, who says that failing to see our interdependence leaves us with the view that we're always lacking, where we find ourselves in a feedback loop of craving. Can you explain this and why it's so detrimental to our efforts to appropriately respond to the climate crisis?
Yeah. Yeah, craving. David asks, and other teachers, is why is more better? It's never going to be enough, because if we see ourselves as separate, we're fundamentally insecure, and we experience this sense of lack, which we are continually trying to fill. So how do we try to fill it? With money and with power and with potato chips and ice cream and fame, and these misguided assumptions that the thing we lack is out there, and if only we had it, we'd feel better. And the realization, as you were saying, is just recognizing that we're part of the whole. And so understanding our interdependence, it's key. It, not only, buoys us and it supports us and it motivates us to take action, but it helps us to feel complete. So we don't have this sense of not feeling enough. I think about this. I have, young grandchildren, and one of my greatest, wishes and aspirations for them is to feel like they are enough, and they have enough and they are enough, so they're not feeling like they have to crave, and that stuff is going to make them feel complete, make them feel whole. But I have to tell you, it's kind of hard in the modern societies with the pressures of social media and other forces mostly related to technology.
Well, I also, when I think of interdependence, I very often think about this image that our friend and colleague Bob Thurman would use. And he would say, this is a very New York kind of example, but he'd say, imagine you're on a subway and these Martians come and they zap the subway car so that those of you who are there are going to be together forever. So how do you act? How do you behave, with that thought, we're going to be together forever? Somebody's hungry, you feed them. Somebody's freaking out, you try to calm them down, not because you necessarily like them or you approve of them, but because you're going to be there together forever. So guess what? I think that truth of interdependence also guides our actions, and it both motivates our actions, our efforts to make change in whatever way or reach out or help somebody. And it also kind of modulates our actions so that it's wiser action.
Mm-hmm. It's a great example.
Yeah, it is. And I've used it, I think, more than Bob, actually. I just repeat it constantly. So
Mm-hmm.
here we are. Guess what?
Yeah, yeah. We're in it together.
Yes, we are in this together. And in your work, I know with Barry Hershey, producer, you help to share the danger of feedback loops in amplifying the climate crisis. So I wonder if you can describe what a feedback loop is. And the feedback loops you focus on involve cycles of global warming and extreme weather. So first, if you could describe what a feedback loop is, because I think it's really essential kind of wisdom or insight into the nature of what's happening, and how do we break these feedback loops? And is it possible that in coming together, working together, we can create positive feedback loops that move things in the opposite direction?
Yeah. Well, the feedback loops, Barry, I just want to do a call out for these films. So Barry produced these 5 short films that I believe the website is feedbackloopsclimate.com. You could search Climate Feedback Loops short films, you'll find it. They're 5 short feedback loops narrated by Richard Gere, and they very beautifully explain the science of climate, these 5 different climate feedback loops. And so some examples of climate feedback loops are the forest feedback loop, or the melting of the Arctic ice and the jet stream. What the feedback loops show is that the warming that's taking place as a result of the years of warming the planet, mostly with that humans have created, is actually amplifying the warming itself. So the warmer it gets, the warmer the planet's getting. And so it's happening very quickly. And we are crossing tipping points daily, like every year there are tipping points that are being crossed, which means that we can't necessarily go back. So I used to say, and actually when I was working on the book, when Barry was producing the films, and we did an event when I was with Mind and Life with the Dalai Lama and with Greta Thunberg on climate feedback loops, there was hope that the feedback loops could be reversed. And I used to, that was where I stood, and I was thinking, I'm not so sure now, honestly, Sharon, if it's completely possible to reverse them. But what we can do And this is where we have to have our focus, is to slow it down through our individual and our collective actions and our ingenuity. And so how do we do that? It's, reducing consumption and stopping deforestation, particularly of old growth forests. It's reducing greenhouse gas emissions and regreening the planet and developing green technologies. It's, it's all hands on deck. And so it's possible, though, that if we can start slowing it down, that maybe the devastation won't be as great. And maybe we won't see it in our lifetime or even our children's lifetime, but maybe in future generations, the slowing might be enough to have a positive effect.
Well, for
I
us
didn't
to
get
be
into
able,
the whole science of the climate feedback loops because I don't want to, bore everybody.
Yeah.
But take a look at the films. They're really, really good, and also the book. We describe them pretty thoroughly.
Yeah, I'm not totally familiar with that language, so it was really interesting to me. And thank you for explaining it, because it does bring me to sort of my next question, also based on something you just said. So for us to be able to collectively shift the direction of these feedback loops, we need to be connected together as a true expression of, in Buddhist teaching, we'd say Sangha, or community. Within this current cultural climate of intense division, or even discussing the facts of our climate crisis is under dispute, and often rancorous dispute, how can we come together?
Well, we can have a conversation about this. Sharon, so I'll share some thoughts. I do think it's possible. And one of the ways we do that is through communication and not being afraid to talk to one another. But I step back before that, is that I think it's easier to have conversations with people who may see things differently and live differently than one another when climate change becomes real. And I think that even just in the last year in the United States, less than last year, we've seen the LA fires and Hurricane Helene in Asheville, North Carolina, is that anyone and everyone can be affected. And of course, those people who are marginalized and poor and are at a greater disadvantage, particularly in the global South. And so we need to do what we can to support them and do what we can to minimize the harm that we're creating. But I do think that the beginning of bringing people together is helping them to realize that nobody is immune from the potential devastating effects of climate change. And when you can realize that actually your family, your community can be affected, it actually does make it more real for people. So just want to begin there, and that's the beginning of how we can maybe have more empathy for others who are experiencing it more significantly on a daily basis. I also think that Katherine Hayhoe, she's a climate scientist and a communication specialist, and she speaks really eloquently about how we can come together and talk to one another, particularly people across the political divides. And Catherine's approach is that no matter who you are, there's a climate angle that we can talk about. So for example, for people who are really financially motivated, and that's the most important thing to them, you may be able to connect with them by saying, explaining how clean energy can positively impact and lower the expense of their monthly utility bills. That's a beginning. So meeting people where they are, it helps us to, realize that we're in this together, and it doesn't divide, and ultimately and hopefully it can unite us. So, Sharon, your perspective on Sangha. You talk to lots of groups, and you have lots of students, and what are your thoughts as it relates to Sangha and community and understanding the climate crisis and how we can work together to solve it?
Well, I think for me, you used the critical word, which is empathy. And for any individual, not necessarily having a different position on climate change, but any individual, it's a question of, for each of us, deepening that sense of belonging to the whole. Like when, I kept reading about, or even these days, about a crisis of loneliness, an epidemic of loneliness. And even before the pandemic, I would read about how a sense of social connection was a tremendous agent in dealing with different clinical conditions. It was a tremendous healing agent. And I kept thinking, well, it can't just be a numbers game. Like, I only have 4 friends, I need 8. Because we all know people who are not like the life of the party. They're not wildly social, but they have a deep, deep sense of connection and care for others. And so that fascinated me, and I kept pondering that, and how any one of us needs to deepen our sense of connection to others, regardless of, particular social interaction. And then, we also live in a time, at least in the United States, where I read, that our big problem is empathy. And so it's a very difficult time in so many ways, with so many conflicting views. But if I were talking to somebody and, who had a very different view, I'll have to look up Catherine Hayhoe's work. But if I were talking to somebody with very different views, I would try not to be talking about positions and ideology, but basically, who do you care about? Like, what's the sphere? What's the realm of your caring? Like, I don't have grandchildren, and you do, and what does it seem to mean to have fires and hurricanes, and but really working with that element of caring, because I believe it's there, obviously in a personal level, for many, and that there's some sphere of responsiveness, and that, I think, is a very profound connection between people, regardless of our views.
Yeah, that is what Catherine says, is to basically come together and understand what we each care about. And by understanding what we care about, it's the point of connection.
That's great to know, and I will look up her work more carefully. And it's so difficult to imagine those places where we might come together, but we do feel very alone, and that is a big problem. So I'm wondering if you could speak to the importance of community in understanding the climate crisis and working to solve it.
Yeah, I think by being in community, whether it's like in our neighborhoods or being in our global community through Zoom, it is, I think, really, really critical to helping us with our grief and realizing that we're not alone, and that can buoy us. I have found for me, when I was working on A Future We Can Love, I was finding myself actually going through this roller coaster of emotions and catching myself feeling pretty sad by looking at the data, if you will. And what was most helpful was connecting with people in a real heartfelt way, to realize that we are in this together and that we're stronger together, and that we can grieve together and have grief rituals, and we can also love together, and we can do together. And even in my own community, been involved in programs of planting trees. And I'll tell you, getting, your hands in the soil and doing it in community, and feel like you're actually actively doing something to be part of making it better, making the situation better, makes us feel better. And so I think that community, helps us in our coping, but it also helps us in actively actually creating change and being activists together.
So as a prelude to my next question, I also just have the reflection that some of what happens in community often for people is just a level of discernment or wisdom about what we can control and what we can't control. And we're so often taught, say in the United States, in the predominant culture, that we should be able to control everything, including dying, And so the inevitability of dying is sort of an insult, because it seems to mean that we've lost control. But even getting older, getting sick, feeling vulnerable, being afraid, all imply a lack of control, which is considered kind of humiliating, which is a very odd conditioning to have, given what reality is. So in your current work, you counsel individuals and groups in purposeful living and dying. And I'm wondering about this work and how it relates to your work around climate activism.
I will say the collective we in our modern society, and it's not just Western, it's all around the world, really. It's the modern society. We are death deniers in general. I'm speaking quite generally here. We know that the Buddhists on the call here are do more into leaning into death than the general society. But in general, we deny death, and we want to do everything we can to really not age and be unwell. And the reality is that no matter how much we deny it, we can't stop it from happening, right? We can slow it down maybe, but we can't stop it from happening. And dear Mother Earth has a very serious illness right now and is dying. There are species that are dying every day that are never going to be coming back. But I think that the more that we can connect with that reality, that things aren't going to last forever, even if we're in decent health, we generally take things for granted. And we go about our everyday lives as if we're not going to die. And we're keeping busy, we're doom scrolling and planning and worrying, regretting. And we're not being present to what we have and not being present to the preciousness of this moment. So to me, this idea of purposeful living and dying is being aware of the finitude of life and the fragility of our individual health and well-being, as well as our planet's health and well-being, and all that we love. And when we can have that perspective, we can then prioritize accordingly. We wake up in the morning, we have 1,440 minutes every day. How do we want to live in those moments? How can we live fully moment by moment by moment? And so, collectively, we can begin to realize the vulnerability of the well-being of our planet and be aware that our planet has a serious illness right now and is aging and is dying. And maybe we can wake up to the beauty and the preciousness of what's right outside our windows and be nourished by it. It's so life-giving just to be present to the simplicity and beauty of nature, and being aware of the losses that are happening. So the species are dying and they're not coming back, and old trees are burning and they're being cut down. But I do think it boils down to what we were talking about earlier, which is love and grief. And if we live purposefully with an awareness that we're not going to last forever and live forever, maybe we won't take anything for granted. And that includes one another, and it includes our beautiful natural world.
I too was thinking just now, about grief, and I know in a future we can love. You write that responsibility starts with knowledge, and unfortunately for many, facing the reality of our climate crisis just leads to paralysis or pessimism. So the first part of my question is, how do you suggest people navigate grief skillfully or well to come through with that kind of reverence for life and that sense of connection?
Most important is that we don't push it away. I think we feel it, we're present to it, and that's a place of connection and unity with others. Again, that to me, that's foundational to action, is to be able to be present to it. And Kriti Kenko, who's a Buddhist teacher who I know has taught and is part of the tricycle community, shares beautiful grief rituals. And we also describe, she wrote a section in the book about some grief rituals that are really powerful and inspired by the work of Joanna Macy.
And so the next part of my question is, where do you derive hope and strength from? And what would you recommend that others do to avoid falling into just despair at our current state?
So it is understanding that it's overwhelming and that we can become paralyzed and pessimistic, that there's nothing we can do. It doesn't matter, right? So there are a few things. So the first are words from His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. And he says, pessimism is not an option. And I have a quote here from him. He says, "Personally, I have never been drawn to pessimism, as it is a form of defeatism. It means giving up before trying. In the face of the climate crisis, I don't think we have the luxury of giving up. We owe it to future generations and to ourselves as well, the knowledge that we at least tried." So, His Holiness says pessimism is not an option. We're not going to be defeated. That's not okay. So that is like, okay, thank you, Your Holiness. I got the message. The other things that there are a few other things that give me hope, Sharon. And, the more I've been leaning into this, the more I realize there are a lot of people, like billions of smart and caring people all around the world, who care, who are making a difference. They're making a difference related to regreening, influencing policies and corporations, putting pressure on corporations, and creating green technologies. So we know that we're kind of being held in this web of amazing beings. I'm also inspired by the work of Karen O'Brien. I'm not sure if you ever heard of Karen, but you should follow her on social media. Take a look at her her on Stacks. But she's a social scientist. She's based at the University of Oslo, and she's raised awareness and has done work on what she calls quantum social change. And it's whereby our values and how our values make a difference. And those values can influence these spheres of influence. So we can begin with our family and our friends, and then our personal network and our communities, and all the way up to the global level. And it's through these social connections and through our culture and the way our behaviors, how our behaviors show up every day, we actually are influencing people, even if we're not saying anything like directly on this topic. And so I'm inspired by quantum social change because it means that you matter, I matter more than I think. And that's actually the title of Karen's book, You Matter More Than You Think. It's a little book, but it's pretty powerful, and it's available free. I'm also inspired by young people, like really young people that are learning about eco-consciousness at a very early age, who know more about it than a lot of adults. And so my 6-year-old grandson, who's in the 1st grade, he tells me and reminds us about conserving energy and what we can do to take care of trees. So if, all these young people, or lots of young people all around the world, are becoming eco-conscious, and they can be, part of the solution along with the adults too, because it's not all, we're not leaving it up to them. And then, finally, I've just, come back to and continue to be deeply inspired by Joanna Macy. And, Joanna has said, and I'll paraphrase what she said, what I remember her saying is that the future is uncertain. So we can, no matter how dark it may look, there's a lot of uncertainty because there's a lot of good things that are happening. So the future's uncertain, and uncertainty is not knowing, and not knowing opens the door to possibility. And everything is possible then when we don't know. So those kinds of things I come back to all the time.
That's really fantastic. And I would actually, before we open this up for general questions, I would be very interested in hearing from the people attending. Where do you derive hope from? If you want to put it in the chat or digitally raise your hand.
That would be wonderful.
It's the most compelling topic, isn't it? Like in a time where one could easily despair. And I also want to thank the people from Tricycle for so quickly putting all these references in the chat. So I can click and start ordering these books or checking out these people. So where do you derive hope from? Or do you? I mean, actually, this may be a prior question.
And Sharon, maybe you can answer it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say very similar things to what you said without sort of the body of knowledge that you have. I think a lot about the Tibetan people and what it means to face adversity and exile and so much suffering in so many ways, and that yet we have somebody like the Dalai Lama who is a beacon of not being defined by that circumstance in some way. I remember him saying, as one example, I was sitting behind people like Barry or scientists, Anna Mangel people were sitting in front of me as the Dalai Lama was teaching. And the Dalai Lama said, well, if I hadn't had to leave Tibet, I never would have met a scientist. And everybody was like, whoa, look at that. So I derive a lot of hope from that. And I also derive a lot of hope from young people, younger than I, which is many people, not just 6-year-olds, with a different level of understanding and perspective and therefore connection. So I want to read some of these. The love inherent to interdependence, the birds that return in the spring. Just being outside helps me think about the resilience of the earth. I draw hope. This is an interesting one. I draw hope from the fact that sometimes I lose hope. Maybe we can hear more about that. Gardening, growing vegetables and flowers and sharing them with others, and cherry blossom trees just coming out. Freedom and detachment, finding God in everything. Reminders that there are, in fact, so many people who care. I would really say, for me as well, it's like a reminder. Like I often say, I often teach, do the good that's in front of you. It may not seem like enough, but it's essential. That's what we can do. It's not a story we're telling ourselves. It's reality that we're facing, that our neighbor needs help or that the garden needs mowing or whatever, the grass needs mowing, the garden doesn't need mowing. And we do the good that's in front of us, and the accumulation of that, I really do believe, makes all the difference. So the terrific resilience and abundance evidenced by spring, and here we are, conversations with young people, and systems theory and Joanna Macy, planting trees in the forests. There's so much here about nature, and here I am, as some of you are in New York City. It's kind of interesting. What is it called, Susan, when we have a deficit of nature?
There's a deficit of nature?
Yeah, when people don't really relate to trees and grass, and there's some syndrome where we
I'm
suffer.
not sure.
Oh yeah.
I know the syndrome, but I don't know the word.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody can put it. Nature deficit disorder. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Okay. Being awestruck by nature that we have now, walking in nature. Not knowing is more reliable and deeper for me than hope. Hope and despair are the same side of the coin. The other side of the coin is not knowing. That's interesting. Well, I think, having written a book on faith, the word, hope it's a complex notion. It depends on what we mean by hope. And very often people do mean a kind of unthinking optimism, like it's bound to work out the way I want it to, which certainly wouldn't be very Buddhist and probably not very wise. But hope, I think, more in the sense of, which could include not knowing, but recognizing the truth of change, not completely identifying with where we are right now, understanding that there's movement and there's flow inevitably, and it's not all going to go in a good direction either, but it's going to happen. And the possibility is that enough efforts or enough clarity will dawn, so that the sense of possibility, which is also inherent in change, can manifest. And that's what I would call hope. The Dalai Lama is where somebody derives hope. The natural world, even if in its smallest appearance, gives me hope. Life is still energetically bursting forth. Hope from change in every moment. There we are. People want to be happy. Someone says music. And here's another reflection. I have hope that at times I need to accept despair. Hope or faith that as we learn about how much we are dependent on the health of the planet, we will take it more seriously. Yes, nature deficit disorder, thank you. Oneness with it all. Inner refuge. Sustainability is the possibility that humans and all life will flourish on Earth forever. All right, that's a quote from John Ehrenfeld. Thank you all so much. That conversation gives me hope.
Yeah, actually, I just want to reflect
Yeah.
back is that just hearing you go through the list and looking at it brings some inner strength. There's like we're buoyed by it. I'm buoyed by it. Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. It's so energizing and enlivening. It's wonderful. Thank you. There was a question that came in earlier. Shall we write our Declaration of Interdependence? What do you think?
Maybe did David put that comment in?
Yeah, David put it on.
Do you want to share? I want to invite him to maybe say more about that. Is that of interest? You put his hand up.
Yes, sorry.
That's okay.
Right.
Doing the Zoom thing. It is purported that Mahatma Gandhi was asked, what do you think of Western civilization? And his purported reply was, it would be a very, very good idea. So I ask, what do you think about interdependence? And I think you reply, it would be a very, very good idea. And perhaps we have to take our not knowing and our bearing witness and actually put it into action. And perhaps we actually are at the point where something like turning righteous indignation into rebellion is what we need to do. And one way of doing that would be not a violent, but a interdependently motivated declaration of interdependence that clearly outlines everything that we have to get right. And that was the nature of the question. And it was to everybody. Mm-hmm. And I want to thank both of you and Tricycle and the Best Family Foundation.
Thanks, David. Well said.
Oh, that Gandhi. It's a pretty good quotation. Yes, and does anybody have questions? You can also, there you go.
We're going to ask you to unmute and go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm participating from Costa Rica, so my perspective is from the heart of the Americas. And we are all very expectant to what's happening in the United States right now, because you are still the hegemonic global power. And there's a very significant dialectic going on. And my basic question is, how can we explain the collective negationism that is still predominant and the reaction that is going on? And how can we envision a positive resolution to this dialectic? You have a global responsibility, a universal responsibility. We all do, but you have the power right now to shift the civilization, the premises of the civilization. And Susan, your message is a bit pessimistic from my point of view, because it's basically accepting the extinction of this planetary civilization, of life on the planet, of millions and millions of years of evolution. And we cannot think this way. It's not responsible. What can we do collectively on the planet?
Thank you. Yeah, we have the United States uses way more than its fair share of energy consumption, and we have a responsibility because we have influence all over the world. And the heartache and the anxiety that you expressed is shared. I want to, just respond to my point about it being pessimistic, is that we are right now, the reality is there is loss that we are facing every single day. There's no doubt about it that, there are species that are dying every day. And at the same time, there are actions that we can do, and it's going to take all of us to come together to do that. So it's a combination of loving and grieving, so we can act together. But Sharon, I'd love to, hear your thoughts about, where we are both living in the United States. We are United States citizens, and I'll say, just for me, it's really, really painful. And I'm also inspired by a lot of wonderful people that are American U.S. citizens that are doing whatever they can to speak out and to try to stop what's happening.
I mean, what's happening is extremely painful and difficult for many people. And somebody put in the chat, perhaps we need to stop thinking of corporate America as America, and individually and collectively, to the best of our ability, remember those ideals which the country has never fulfilled totally, both internally and internationally. But they exist, and maybe we need to write a declaration of interdependence and see what we can transform, both internally and, I mean, when you say America is the superpower, my first thought was that's not going to last long. Now, something is going to crumble, and maybe it needs to crumble. But I think we each have a responsibility in a climate of hatred, and greed, and so much that's empowered right now, to offer a counter narrative, and to work toward that. Like something like loving kindness or compassion seems like, for many people, the stupidest thing in the world right now, or even empathy. And so if we believe that's not the case, we have a responsibility to offer that a different vision of who we are and how we relate to one another, including internationally. And it's a tough time, but here we are. What do we really believe in, and what do we want to promote? And I know we need to stop, so I want to turn it over to Allison. And thank you for that question. I will keep pondering, I think, quite deeply.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. It is a hard time for us, and I'm so happy we can gather with international participants, because as we have heard, it's a global, we are globally interdependent. And I thank you both so much for facilitating a conversation, which I feel a lot of hope from. So thank you all for participating and sharing where you find hope. I definitely feel the strength of the community. So let's keep it going. And I'm gonna say just a few more words about the summit, but really thank you all for joining us. For those of you who don't know, we do offer this summit by donation. So if you haven't already, please consider making a donation to support this offering at trischool.org/donate. Also, if you'd like to rewatch any of these events or catch the ones you missed, we will email the replays at the end of the summit, and we'll also put them up on YouTube. We hope you watch them and share them. And our last event of the series is today at 3 p.m. Eastern, Rethinking Restoration, Uncovering Our Potential Through Our Deepest Connections with Paul Hawken. You can use the same Zoom link that you used to join this, to join that. And finally, as part of an extension of this summit, this month we've been meeting every Monday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern with Mark Coleman, who's been giving Eco Dharma practices. So we hope you'll join us for that. His last session is this Monday, April 28th at 11 a.m. Eastern on Zoom. We'll drop that link in the chat as well, but you can find all of this at trischool.org. So thank you again so much. It's been an honor to be with all of you, and Sharon and Susan, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, and thank you for bringing us together.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Hope to see you all soon. Bye.